Hello everyone, welcome to Cyber Platter. This is a video to help you understand CCSP topics and help you prepare for the exam. Today we will discuss about Domain 4, a portion of it. Part 1 of Domain 4, there is a video and I've added the link in the description. So please go through that before you start this part. So today's agenda is 4.1 to 4.3 is covered in part 1. So here rest of the topics, that is how to apply cloud software assurance and validation, use verified secure software, specifics of cloud application architecture and IAM solutions will be discussed today here. The first topic is cloud development. As cloud-based application development continues to gain popularity and widespread adoption, it is important to recognize the benefits and efficiencies along with the challenges and complexities, right? Cloud development typically includes integrated development environments, that is IDEs, application lifecycle management components, and application security testing. We will discuss about all these topics in depth, okay? Inherent to the continued and expanded use of technology to deliver services, organizations are presented with qualitative and quantitative risks and challenges. The failure to address these risks directly affects the organization, its software supply chain, that is the extended enterprise API management, and its customers. For the appropriate steps and controls to be implemented, these organizations must understand application security in a cloud environment along with the differences from traditional information technology computing. Organizations need to understand and appreciate that cloud-based development and applications can vary from traditional or on-premise development. When considering an application for cloud deployment, you must remember that applications can be broken down into subcomponents of data, functions, and processes. The components can be broken up so that the portions that have sensitive data can be processed or stored in specified locations to comply with enterprise policies, standards, and applicable laws and regulations. The next topic is API. API stands for Application Programming Interface. The key difference between application development in the cloud and in traditional IT models is that cloud development relies heavily on the usage of APIs. An API is a software to software communication link that allows two applications like a client and a server to interact with one another over the internet. APIs include the set of programming instructions and standards necessary for a client application to interact with some web-based server application to perform actions or retrieve needed information. Because cloud environments are strictly web accessible, cloud service providers make APIs available to cloud developers to allow them to access, manage, and control cloud resources. There are several types of API formats, but the most commonly used are SOAP and REST. SOAP is Simple Object Access Protocol and REST is Representational State Transfer. SOAP and REST are quite different in approach and implementation. The only few similarities are that SOAP and REST both work across HTTP HTTPS and both rely on established rules that their users have agreed to follow. SOAP is a protocol that was designed to ensure that programs built in different languages or platforms could communicate with each other in a structured manner. SOAP encapsulates data in a SOAP envelope and then uses HTTP or other protocols like FTP or SMTP to transmit the encapsulated data. A major limitation of SOAP is that it only allows usage of XML formatted data. While SOAP was the standard solution for web service interfaces, today it is typically used to support legacy applications or where REST is not technically feasible to use. SOAP is a complicated, slow, and rigid protocol. REST is a standard that addresses these shortcomings of SOAP. REST is a flexible architectural scheme that can use SOAP as the underlying protocol if desired. And REST supports data formats such as JSON, XML, or YAML. Part of the convenience behind REST is that RESTful services use standard URLs and HTTP methods like GET, POST, DELETE to manage resources. Also, when it comes to scalability, REST is very scalable and SOAP is very complex when it comes to scalability. So some of the situations where REST protocol works really well is when the bandwidth is limited, when stateless operations are used, and when caching is needed. And some of the places where SOAP fits better is asynchronous processing, format contract, stateful operations. Neither API format is necessarily better than the other. It is important to understand that regardless of what type of API you use to offer web services, you are granting another application access to the primary application and any data it may have access to. This can present many security challenges for end users unable to evaluate the security of any specific API or even which API or APIs they are using. This can lead to data leakage or other problems if the APIs in question have not been sufficiently vetted and validated to ensure they provide adequate security. The next topic is software assurance and validation. Before actually knowing what is functional testing and security testing, let's see what is black box and white box testing. Black box testing is a software testing method in which the internal design of the component being tested is not known to the tester. White box testing is the opposite method and involves granting the tester complete knowledge of the tested component's inner workings. Black box tests are used in cases where knowledge of the internal design are not needed for testing or in situations where you seek test results that mimic those of a complete outsider. White box testing is more exhaustive and time consuming but allows testers to expose more weaknesses because they are given information that allows them to design tests specifically for a given application. So now let's see what is functional testing. Functional testing is used to verify that business requirements have been met and the application operates as expected without errors. Function testing is a type of software testing that evaluates individual functions, features, or components of an application rather than the complete application as a whole. Functional testing is considered black box testing and works by feeding the tested function an appropriate input and comparing the output against functional requirements. This type of testing does not evaluate the actual source code or the processing within the application, but instead is concerned only with the results of the processing. Because functional testing is used to test various aspects of an application, the types of tests are wide ranging. Examples of some functional tests include unit testing, component testing, integration testing, regression testing, user acceptance testing, and so on. Functional testing within cloud environments has all the same considerations as traditional data center environments and then some. Because you're operating in an environment with shared responsibility, developers must perform functional testing to evaluate the application's compliance with all legal and regulatory obligations. You must consider how multi-tenancy, geographic distribution, and other cloud-specific attributes impact your specific testing needs. The next one is security testing. Testing the security aspects of software requires a specialized skill set. Security testing is used to verify and validate there are appropriate security controls. Before deployment and on an ongoing basis, cloud developers should use several application security testing methodologies to find and remediate weaknesses in their applications. For the most part, the methodologies align with security testing practices in traditional data center environments, but practical application of each methodology may differ due to the characteristics of cloud architecture. Static application security testing, SAST, is one of the security methodologies. SAST is generally considered a white box test where the application test performs an analysis of the application source code, bytecode, and binaries without executing the application code. SAST is used to determine coding errors and omissions that are indicative of security vulnerabilities. SAST is often used as a test method while the tool is under development, that is, in the early development lifecycle. SAST can be used to find cross site scripting errors, SQL injection, buffer overflows, unhandled error conditions, and potential backdoors. Because SAST is a white box test tool, it typically delivers more comprehensive results than the other test methods. The next one is Dynamic Application Security Testing, DAST. DAST is generally considered a black box test where the tool must discover individual execution paths in the application being analyzed. Unlike SAST, which analyzes code offline, that is, when the code is not running, DAST is used against applications in their running state. DAST is mainly considered effective when testing exposed HTTP and HTML interfaces of web applications. It is important to understand that SAST and DAST play important roles and that one is not better than the other. SAST and dynamic application tests work together to enhance the reliability of organizations creating and using secure applications. One is runtime application self protection. Runtime application self protection RASP is generally considered to focus on applications that possess self protection capabilities built into their runtime environments, which have full insight into application logic, configuration, and data and event flows. RASP prevents attacks by self protecting or reconfiguring automatically without human intervention in response to certain conditions like threats, faults, etc. There's vulnerability assessment. Actually, we'll talk about vulnerability assessment and pen test as one topic because they're very similar. Vulnerability scanning involves searching the environment for known flaws, often with an automated tool. Vulnerability scanning does not necessarily identify configuration errors, but is more of a set of vulnerability definitions compared against the application or network being scanned. These types of scanners are also often employed by hackers as part of ongoing reconnaissance for vulnerabilities to be used later in attacks. However, when we perform vulnerability scanning to test our own system, no exploitation occurs, and as long as the scans are performed properly, no damage should occur. Sometimes errors occur, but usually at worst, the system will need a reboot. The downside, of course, to vulnerability scanning is that it can only detect the vulnerabilities for which it has definitions, that is, known vulnerabilities. Any vulnerabilities not currently known and included in the scanning tool can later become zero-day exploitations if and when attackers figure out how to use them. Penetration testing is designed to find vulnerabilities and to then exploit them to the point of actually gaining unauthorized access to systems or data. These tests usually begin with a reconnaissance and or vulnerability scan to identify system weaknesses and then move on to the penetration phase. The difference between penetration testing and vulnerability scanning is that penetration testing is active and vulnerability scanning is almost exclusively passive. When I say penetration testing is active, it is the part where the actual penetration of the environment takes place. It is extremely important to mention that under no circumstances should you ever attempt any type of vulnerability scanning or penetration testing against an application or system without full authorization to do so. You could be violating several laws and get into some very deep trouble. The next one is secure code reviews. Conducting a secure code review, whether informally or formally, is another approach to assessing code for appropriate security controls. An informal code review may involve one or more individuals examining sections of the code looking for vulnerabilities. A formal code review may involve the use of trained teams of reviewers that are assigned specific roles as part of the review process, as well as the use of a tracking system to report on vulnerabilities found. The integration of a code review process into the system development lifecycle can improve the quality and security of the code being deployed. We also have to be careful not to use the same developers who wrote the code in performing the test. The testing team needs to be composed of people with entirely fresh eyes and no inherent conflict of interest. The next topic is using verified secure software. A key aspect of software development is understanding your development environment and the components that make up your software application. Using verified secure software is critical in any environment, but even more important in cloud environments that are often comprised of or connected with many different components that are not completely within your control. First topic here is approved APIs. Application programming interfaces are a means for a company to expose functionality to applications. The benefits of APIs include programmatic control and access, automation, and integration with third party tools. Consumption of APIs can lead to your firm leveraging insecure products. Organizations must also consider the security of software and APIs outside of their corporate boundaries. Consumption of external APIs should go through the same approval process that's used for all other software being consumed by the organization. The cloud security professional needs to ensure that there is a formal approval process in place for all APIs. If there is a change in an API or an issue due to an unforeseen threat, a vendor update, or any other reason, the API in question should not be allowed until a thorough review has been undertaken to assess the integrity of the API in light of the new information. When leveraging APIs, the cloud security professional should take steps to ensure that API access is secured. This requires the use of SSL, that is Secure Sockets Layer, or message level crypto access authentication for SOAP and logging of API usage. In addition, the use of a tool such as Dependency Check of OWASP, which is a utility that identifies project dependencies and checks whether there are any known publicly disclosed vulnerabilities, would be valuable. When consuming APIs, the customer is relying on the API vendor to have included appropriate security controls and conducted testing and validation to ensure the integrity and security of the application. However, there is often little opportunity to confirm this in advance. For instance, there are no certifications of APIs. You are reliant on the vendor's promise that data exchanges have been tested and validated. One of the most significant problems with using APIs is that not everyone who creates them uses the same level of scrutiny. APIs are sometimes coded with little or no validation or security testing. Consumption of these APIs without any type of validation can lead to data leakage, poor authentication, and authorization and application failure. In addition, manipulating an unsecured API could at the worst lead to a data breach. And also, when an application is updated or changed, the API may expose items that were not exposed before. Keeping all this in mind, you should make sure that there is an approval process for both the APIs that you are creating and for the external APIs that are being used, and also when they get changed or updated. The next one is software supply chain management. It is critical for organizations to consider the implications of non secure software beyond their corporate boundaries. The ease with which software components with known vulnerabilities or with uncertain development processes can be combined to produce new applications has created a complex and highly dynamic software supply chain, that is API management. In effect, people are consuming more and more software that is being developed by a third party or accessed with or through third party libraries to create or enable functionality without having a clear understanding of the origins of the software and code in question. This leads to a situation in which a complex and highly dynamic software interaction is taking place between and among one or more services and systems within the organization and between organizations via the cloud. This supply chain supplies agility in the rapid development of applications to meet consumer demand. However, software components produced without secure software development can create security risks throughout the supply chain. Therefore, it is important to assess all code and services for proper and secure functioning no matter where they are sourced. Suggested ways of dealing with these issues include auditing or contractual language for acquired applications, as well as security reviews for developed apps to ensure they only make use of authorized APIs. The next one is third party software management. We already talked about this when we were talking about approved APIs and supply chain management, so I'm not going to repeat the same. So let's go to the next topic, that is validated open source software. There is a philosophical disagreement in the information security community about whether proprietary software is preferable and more secure than the open source variety. Proprietary software is where the source code is hidden from everyone except the vendor. Open source software is where the source code is published and anyone can review it, make modifications, and publish derivative versions. Both offer some value. However, it is generally agreed that open source programs are more flexible, provide largely the same protections, and have a greater range of functionality than their proprietary counterparts. Perhaps one of the main points in favor of proprietary options is the possibility that liability will map back to the vendor. That is, breaches or other impacts due to failures in the program can be blamed on the vendor, who may be held accountable. Another benefit might be the active and constant efforts of vendors to update and secure their proprietary applications. The benefit of choosing open source programs often includes a reduced price and the opportunity to review the code to test it for security vulnerabilities. Open source code also allows the user to make whatever modifications they choose in order to add or enhance functionality. The next topic is supplemental security components. Developing cloud applications involves more than a development environment and your application code. Cloud application architecture requires supplemental security components from your cloud infrastructure and a combination of technologies like cryptography, sandboxing, and application virtualization. When developing applications, it's important not to rely solely on the application itself for security. Following a defense in depth approach, your application architecture should include multiple layers of security controls that protect different aspects of your applications in different ways. The additional layers of security components serve to supplement the security already built into your application development. The first one is Web Application Firewall WAF. A WAF is a layer 7 firewall that can understand HTTP traffic. A cloud WAF can be extremely effective in the case of a DOS attack. In several cases, a cloud WAF was used to successfully prevent DOS attacks of 350 gigabytes or 450 gigabytes per second. The next one is Data Activity Monitoring, DAM. DAM is a layer 7 monitoring device that understands SQL commands. DAM can be agent-based or network-based. A DAM can detect and stop malicious commands from executing on an SQL server. XML Gateway. XML gateways transform the way services and sensitive data are exposed as APIs to developers, mobile users, and cloud users. XML gateways can be either hardware or software. XML gateways can implement security controls such as data loss prevention, DLP, antivirus, and anti-malware services. Firewalls. Firewalls can be distributed or configured across the SaaS, PaaS, and infrastructure as a service landscapes. These can be owned and operated by the provider or can be outsourced by a third party for ongoing management and maintenance. Firewalls in the cloud need to be installed as software components such as host-based firewalls. API gateway. An API gateway is a device that filters API traffic. It can be installed as a proxy or as a specific part of your application stack before data is processed. An API gateway can implement access control, rate limiting, logging, metrics, and security filtering. Virtual Local Area Network (VLAN). A VLAN is a logical means of isolating particular portions or segments of a network, even though the machines may all be physically connected. Member devices in a VLAN can only communicate directly with other members of the same VLAN unless the traffic first passes through a portal or gateway leading outside the VLAN. DHCP Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. When assigning IP addresses to devices, we can use a permanent specific address for a given device. This is called static addressing. An alternative to static addressing is assigning an IP to a specific device for only a certain duration temporarily. This is dynamic addressing. The method we use for the dynamic addressing is the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol (DHCP). A DHCP in an environment selects an IP address from the allowed range, that is, the range of IP addresses owned by the organization, and assigns it to a specific device and keeps a record of which devices have which addresses. When the use of the address is terminated, the address goes back into the pool of allowed addresses and the DHCP server can reassign it to another machine or the same machine. Next one is Domain Name Service (DNS). The Domain Name Service is how computers translate IP addresses to domain names. DNS functions through the use of hierarchical distributed tables. When a change is made to how a domain name relates to a specific IP address, the change is registered at the top domain of the DNS hierarchy and then filters down to all other DNS servers. When a user wants to communicate with another machine, the user's machine, or often the application on the user's machine, queries a device with a DNS table to get the correct address. Security extensions DNSSEC add to security by providing origin authority, data integrity, and authenticated denial of service, reducing susceptibility to spoofing. The next topic is cryptography. The cloud security candidate must be familiar with the different types of encryption, the places where it is used, and the use case for each. Data is typically encrypted either when it is at rest or when is it in transit, and both types of encryption can be effectively used as part of overall cloud security. Encryption of data in transit. Encryption of data in transit is necessary to mitigate against intermediaries, often referred to as the man in the middle attack. Some of the examples of data in transit encryption are Transport Layer Security (TLS), a protocol that ensures privacy between communicating applications and their users on the internet. When a server and client communicate, TLS ensures that no third party may eavesdrop or tamper with a message. TLS is the successor to SSL. SSL Secure Sockets Layer. SSL is the standard security technology for establishing an encrypted link between a web server and a browser. This link ensures that all data passed between the web server and browsers remains private and integral. Virtual Private Network (VPN), such as IPsec Gateway. VPN is a network that is constructed by using public wires, usually the internet, to connect to a private network such as company's internal network. A number of systems enable you to create networks using the internet as the medium for transporting data. Next one is encryption of data at rest. Data at rest, whether it be short-term or long-term storage, should be protected from multi-tenancy issues and similar problems. Encrypting data at rest is a great way to prevent unauthorized access to data. Data stored in a multi-tenant environment poses a risk that did not exist in the traditional environment. A government or law enforcement or regulatory entity might seize a particular hardware component while investigating one tenant and end up with data belonging to various tenants. If each tenant applies its own cryptography, those tenants not under investigation should remain protected from unauthorized disclosure in this type of situation. The examples of data rest encryption are whole instance encryption, a method for encrypting all the data associated with the operation and use of a virtual machine, such as the data stored at rest on the volume, disk input output, all snapshots created from the volume, as well as all data in transit moving between the virtual machine and the storage volume. Next one is volume encryption. A method for encrypting a single volume on a drive is called as volume encryption. Parts of the hard drive are left unencrypted when using this method. Full disk encryption can be used to encrypt the entire contents of the drive. Next one is file or directory encryption. This is a method for encrypting a single file or directory on a drive. Technologies and approaches such as tokenization, data masking, and sandboxing are valuable along with the implementation of cryptographic solution. The main goal of the application of cryptography to data is to ensure that confidentiality of data is maintained. Traditional cryptographic protections are applied using encryption based on the use of an algorithm of varying strengths to generate either a single key, symmetric, or dual key asymmetric solution. Sometimes the use of encryption is not the most appropriate or functional choice for a system protection element due to design, usage, and performance concerns. As a result, additional technologies and approaches like tokenization and data masking. Tokenization generates a token, often a string of characters, that is used to substitute sensitive data. The token itself is stored in a secured location, such as a database. When accessed by a non authorized entity, only the token string is shown, not the actual data. Tokenization is often implemented to satisfy the PCI DSS requirements for firms that process credit cards. Data masking is a technology that keeps the format of a data string but alters the content. For instance, if you are storing development data for a system that is meant to parse social security numbers, it is important that the format remain intact. Using traditional encryption, the format is altered to a long string of random characters. Data masking ensures that data retains its original format without being actionable by anyone who manages to intercept the data. The next topic is sandboxing. In context of computing, the term sandbox can mean a couple of things. A physical sandbox is a test environment of isolated devices and cables, completely distinct from the production environment. In fact, there is often space, actual empty space between the physical sandbox or test bed, so we refer to the two environments, production and test, as air gapped. The benefit of a physical the benefit of a physical sandbox is that errors or vulnerabilities introduced there will not contaminate or affect the production environment. A logical sandbox is an isolated memory space where untrusted or untested code can be run in isolation from the underlying hardware so that detrimental aspects of the program do not affect the machine or programs. Either type of sandbox might be used during the SDLC for testing code in development or for security purposes, such as performing forensics analysis on malware or experimenting with patches or updates before they are deployed in the production environment. Application virtualization. Application virtualization is the process of encapsulating or bundling an application into a self contained package that is isolated from the underlying operating system on which it is executed. This form of sandboxing allows the application to run on a system without needing to be installed on that system, which enables running the target application on virtually any system, even ones with operating systems that the application wasn't built to run on. From the user's perspective, the application works just as if it were running on its native OS, much like hypervisors trick virtual machines into thinking they are running directly on hardware.
Application virtualization benefits cloud users by providing the ability to test applications in a known environment without posing risk to the rest of the environment. In addition, application virtualization allows applications to run in environments that they couldn't run in natively. For example, running Windows applications in Mac or vice versa. Another notable benefit to cloud customers is that application virtualization uses fewer resources than virtual machines, as only the bare minimum resources needed to operate the application are bundled in the virtualized application. It should come as no surprise that where there are benefits, there are also drawbacks or things to consider. Developers should be aware that applications that require heavy integration with the OS or underlying hardware are not suitable for virtualization. Additionally, application virtualization adds considerable software licensing challenges. Both the virtualized application and its host system must be correctly licensed. Wine, Microsoft AppV, Zen app are examples of application virtualization. Due to significant differences between running applications in cloud compared with traditional infrastructure, it is of crucial importance to address the security of applications through the use of assurance and validation techniques. Software assurance. Software assurance includes the development and implementation of methods and processes for ensuring that software functions as intended while mitigating the risks of vulnerabilities, malicious code, or defects that could bring harm to the end user. Software assurance is vital to ensuring the security of critical information technology resources. Information and communications technology vendors have a responsibility to address assurance through every stage of application development. Now, let's understand what is verification and validation. For project and development teams to have confidence and to follow best practice guidelines, verification and validation of coding at each stage of the development process are required. Coupled with relevant segregation of duties and appropriate independent reviews, verification and validation look to ensure that the initial concept and delivered product are complete. As part of the process, you should verify that requirements are specified and measurable and that test plans and documentation are comprehensive and consistently applied to all modules and subsystems and integrated with the final product. Verification and validation occurs at each stage of development to ensure consistency of the application. Verification and validation should be performed at each stage of the software development lifecycle and in line with change management components. The next concept is application orchestration. When two or more applications must interact in order to successfully complete a business process or transaction, there are two general approaches we can take. The first one is link elements to the applications directly so that the output of one or step of one is the input of another. The second approach is to abstract the functions of the application such that their input outputs can be handled distinctly from the way the program works, often with another set of code or software. The first option, where we link the elements of the applications directly, can lead to additional problems such as creating unnecessary dependencies and increasing the difficulty of version control and testing. Therefore, the second approach of abstraction, referred to as application orchestration, is often preferable. Orchestration often requires that data from the various participating applications be converted to a new format so that the information can work in the orchestration. It may also involve creating a new overlay or interface with the data or application so that the interaction can be managed. Identity and access management, IAM. IAM is about people, processes, and procedures used to create, manage, and destroy identities of all kinds. IAM systems typically consist of several components. First, they allow creation of identification mechanisms. IAM then allows the organization to verify or authenticate users' identities prior to granting access to systems or assets. Once authenticated, the users are then authorized and given subsequent access to resources. The user is generally managed through a central user repository. IAM functionality is often divided into identity management, access management, and identity repository or directory. First, let's discuss about identity management. Identity management is the process whereby individuals are given access to system resources by associating user rights with a given identity. Provisioning is the first phase of identity management where each subject is issued a unique identity assertion. That is something that serves as an identification, such as a user ID. During this process, the user is usually also issued a password for use in authenticating the identity assertion. The entity issuing the password and identity assertion will retain a record of each for use in recognizing the user later. That is when the user logs into resources with the user ID password combination. The generation, storage, and security controls of these passwords are collectively known as password management. The next one is access management. Access management is part of the process that deals with controlling access to resources once they have been granted. Access management identifies who a user is and what they are allowed to access each time they attempt to access a resource. This is accomplished through a combination of authentication, authorization, policy management, federation, identity repositories. Authentication. Authentication establishes identity by accessing. Authentication establishes identity by asking who you are and determining whether you are a legit user, often by combining the use of an identity assertion and an authentication factor, for example, a user ID and password. Authorization. Authorization evaluates what you have access to after authentication occurs. In many cases, this means comparing the identity assertion against an access control list ACL. Policy management. Policy management serves as the enforcement arm of authentication and authorization and is established based on business needs and senior management decisions. Federation. Federation is an association of organizations that facilitate the exchange of information as appropriate about users and access to resources, allowing them to share resources across multiple organizations. Identity repositories, the directory services for the administration of user accounts and their associated attributes. These components are stored in what is called as an identity repository directory. The schema used is much more detailed and has many more uses, and it must be heavily protected. A breach of this component would be devastating to the organization. Identity repositories are the store of information or attributes of identities. Directory services are how those identities and attributes are managed. They allow the administrator to customize user roles, identities, and so on. All of this becomes even more important when we deal with federation, as there must be a consistent means of accessing these identities and their associated attributes in order to work across different systems. Some of the most widely used directory services are X500 and LDAP, Microsoft Active Directory, Novel eDirectory, metadata replication, and synchronization. Next topic is Federated Identity Management (FIM). Federated Identity Management provides the policies, processes, and mechanisms that manage identity and trusted access to systems across organizations. The technology of federation is much like that of Kerberos with an Active Directory domain. A user logs on once to a domain controller and is ultimately granted an access token and uses that token to gain access to systems for which the user has authorization. The difference is that whereas Kerberos works well in a single domain, federated identities allow for the generation of tokens, that is authentication, in one domain and the consumption of these tokens, that is authorization, in another domain. Federation standards. Although many federation standards exist, Security Assertion Markup Language SAML is by far the most commonly accepted standard used in the industry today. SAML 2.0 is an XML-based framework for communicating users' authentication, entitlement, and attribute information. SAML allows user entities to make assertions regarding the identity, attributes, and entitlements of a subject, like a human user, to other entities such as a partner company or another enterprise application. There are other standards as well in the federation space. WS Federation. This uses the term realms in explaining its capabilities to allow organizations to trust each other's identity information across organizations. OAuth. OAuth is often used in authorization with mobile apps. The OAuth framework provides third-party applications limited access to HTTP services. OpenID Connect. OpenID Connect is an interoperable authentication protocol based on the OAuth 2 specification. It allows developers to authenticate their users across websites and applications without having to manage usernames and passwords. Federated identity providers. In a federated environment, there is an identity provider and a relying party. The identity provider holds all the identities and generates a token for known users. The relying party is the service provider and consumes those tokens. In a cloud environment, it is desirable that the organization itself continues to maintain all identities and act as the identity provider. Federated SSO. Federated SSO is typically used for facilitating inter-organizational and inter-security domain access to resources leveraging federated identity management. Identity providers. Like I mentioned before, in a federated system, an identity provider is a trusted third party organization that stores user identities and authenticates your credentials to prove your identity to other services and applications. For example, when you're online shopping, many of the retail websites prompt you to sign in with your Facebook account or Google account, etc. In this example, Facebook serves as the online store's trusted identity provider and uses your Facebook account info to authenticate you on behalf of that retailer. Instead of Facebook passing your account information to the retailer, it uses your verified Facebook credentials to tell the retailer that you are who you say you are. Tons of identity providers work on-prem and in the cloud. Some popular identity providers include Ping Identity, Okta Identity Management, Google Cloud Identity, Azure Active Directory, AWS IAM. Using a trusted identity provider can offer a lot of security benefits. Not only does it offload the need for your application to manage user identities, but it also provides a centralized audit trail for all access to your application. Reliable identity providers keep historical record of all access events, which is a major benefit when demonstrating compliance with various regulatory requirements. In addition, a good identity provider provides robust security around its identity management systems, allowing your development team to focus more on creating great applications and less on foundational access security. Whether your organization uses an identity provider or manages identities internally, it's important that you give strong consideration to application identity management as part of your cloud security strategy. The next topic is single sign-on (SSO). When an organization has a variety of resources that each require authentication, usage and utilization can become cumbersome for users, especially when they have to keep track of passwords and user IDs that have different requirements, that is, different length, complexity, and so on. Single sign-on (SSO) is a way to address this and simplify the operational experience for the user. While there are several ways to implement SSO, the term generally refers to a situation where the user signs in once, usually to an authentication server, and then when the user wants to access the organization resources, each resource will query the authentication server to determine if the user is logged in and properly authenticated. The authentication server then approves the request and the resource server grants the user access. All of this should be transparent to the user, streamlining their use of the resources on the network. Theoretically, the user could log in just once per day when they sit down at their desk to begin work and never have to re enter any additional sign on credentials. This convenience does not, of course, come without costs and risks. SSO solutions are difficult to implement and maintain. An attacker gaining a user's single credential will have access to multiple systems, and the impact of losing an SSO server will be much greater than losing an individual system. The next one is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication has become more popular and widespread in recent years due to increased demand for better authorization, security, and decreased costs of the technology. Many banks have used such technology since the early 2000s to facilitate secure wire transfers. So, how can you authenticate yourself? There are three ways. The first one is knowledge, what they know, that is, what the user knows, such as password and PIN. The second one is possession, what they have or what the users have, that is, token, card, YubiKeys. The third one is inherence, what they are, that is, what users are, that is, biometrics. To be a multi-factor system, users must be able to provide at least two of these. That is, they should provide a password or a token, or password or biometrics or token, something like that, a combination.
One-time passwords also fall under the banner of multi-factor authentication. The use of one-time passwords is strongly encouraged during provisioning and communicating of first login passwords to users. Step-up authentication is an additional factor or procedure that validates a user's identity, normally prompted by high-risk transactions or violations according to policy rules. Some of the methods that are commonly used for step-up authentication are challenge questions, out-of-band authentication like SMS text message by the end user, dynamic knowledge-based authentication like questions unique to the end user. A cloud access security broker or CASB is a software application that sits between cloud users and cloud services and applications while actively monitoring all cloud usage and implementing centralized controls to enforce security. A CASB may be used to mitigate high risk security events or to prevent such events altogether by enforcing security policies, stopping malware, and alerting security teams of potential security events. A CASB can serve many purposes, but at a minimum, a CASB has four pillars. The first one is visibility. CASB provides visibility into an organization's cloud usage, including who uses which cloud applications and from what devices. CASBs also enforce bring your own device policies and can help detect, monitor, and secure shadow IT. The second pillar of CASB is data security. CASB monitors the security of data owned and operated by the organization. CASBs can help prevent data exfiltration through cloud services and can enforce specific security policies based on the user data or activity. By providing a comprehensive view of cloud usage, CASBs can help guard against insider threats, both malicious and accidental. The fourth pillar of CASB is compliance. CASB helps organizations demonstrate compliance with regulatory requirements like HIPAA, PCI DSS, and GDPR. From a security perspective, most CASBs are able to enforce policies related to authentication and authorization, logging, encryption, malware prevention, and more. There are three primary types of CASB solutions: forward proxy, reverse proxy, and API based. Forward proxy. This type of CASB sits close to the user, that is on their desktop or mobile phone, and uses an encrypted man-in-the-middle technique to securely inspect and forward all cloud traffic for the user. This type of CASB requires you to install certificates on every single device that needs to be monitored. This makes it challenging to deploy in large distributed organizations. Reverse proxy. This type of CASB sits close to the cloud service provider and integrates into identity services like Okta to force users' traffic through the CASB for inline monitoring. This type eliminates the need to individually install certificates on user devices, but reverse proxy CASPs are not compatible with client-server applications that have hard-coded host names. Third type of CASB is API based. This type of CASB allows organizations to enable CASB protection to any user on any device from any location. API based CASBs monitor data within the cloud itself rather than on a proxy at the perimeter. There's no need to install anything on user devices, and it's also much more performance friendly than both proxy based devices. A major limitation, however, is that not all cloud applications provide API support.